Welcome to a journey that your history teachers never prepared you for. We like to think that the ground beneath our feet is a silent witness, a graveyard of primitive ancestors who knew nothing of the world we've built. We believe that we are the first to fly, the first to compute, and the first to master the atom. But what if we are simply the latest in a long line of masters? Today, we are diving into 7 artifacts that defy every law of archaeology. These aren't just strange finds. They are physical glitches in the matrix of time. From nanotechnology found in 300,000-year-old dirt to a common tool encased in rock from the age of the dinosaurs. Each of these objects tells us that our past isn't a straight line. It's a cycle of grand rises and catastrophic falls. Prepare to question everything you know. This is the Forbidden Timeline, 7 ancient tools that defy modern science. Imagine you are standing in the remote, rugged wilderness of the Ural Mountains in Russia. It's the early 1990s. This is a place for gold prospectors, men looking for riches buried in the riverbeds of the Kozhim and Narada rivers. They are digging deep, far below the permafrost, hoping for a glimmer of gold. But one afternoon they find something that isn't gold. It isn't even a nugget. It's a tiny, metallic coil, a spiral, so small it's almost invisible to the naked eye. At first, the miners think it's just modern industrial trash, maybe some scrap metal from a nearby construction site or a piece of a broken drill, but they keep digging. And they find more. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. These tiny spirals are buried at depths between 10 and 40 feet. Now, in geological terms, that depth is a time capsule. Those layers of earth haven't been disturbed for tens of thousands of years. So the miners send these tiny objects to the Russian Academy of Sciences. And this is where the story shifts from a curious discovery to a scientific nightmare. When the researchers put these coils under an electron microscope, they realize they aren't looking at trash. They are looking at high-level microengineering. Some of these spirals follow the golden ratio. Some are as large as 3 centimeters, but the smallest ones, they are 3 microns wide. To give you some perspective, a human hair is about 50 to 70 microns wide. We are talking about objects that are 20 times smaller than a single strand of your hair. These aren't just small, they are microscopic. But the size wasn't the biggest shock. It was the material. The larger coils were copper, which is fine. Humans have used copper for a long time. But the smaller microscopic ones, they were made of tungsten and molybdenum. Now, if you aren't a metallurgist, let me explain why that is impossible. Tungsten has one of the highest melting points of any element on the periodic table, over 3,400 degrees Celsius. Today, we use it in rocket engines, light bulb filaments, and high-tech weaponry. You don't just accidentally forge tungsten in a campfire. You need specialized, high-heat industrial facilities. The Russian Academy tested the soil layers again, desperate to find a modern explanation. They hoped these were just debris from a modern rocket launch from the nearby Plesetsk Cosmodrome. But the dating came back undeniable. These spirals were found in undisturbed layers of Earth dating back between 20,000 and 300,000 years. 300,000 years ago. According to every history book ever written, 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were barely beginning to emerge. Our ancestors were using sharpened flint to hunt mammoths. They hadn't even mastered the wheel. They certainly weren't manufacturing molybdenum microcomponents. So, what are we looking at? If they aren't modern trash, and they aren't natural formations, because nature doesn't create perfect geometric tungsten spirals, then we are left with a conclusion that mainstream science is terrified to admit. Either a highly advanced industrial civilization existed on this planet during the Ice Age, or these are the physical remnants of a technology that didn't originate on Earth. Think about the precision. Think about the intent. These spirals look like filaments, or perhaps components for some kind of circuit board or sensor system. They weren't jewelry. They weren't art. They were functional. They were parts of a machine that was lost, buried, and forgotten while the rest of humanity was still struggling to build a fire. As we move through the rest of this video, I want you to keep these tiny spirals in mind. because they prove that size doesn't matter when it comes to the impact of a discovery. Sometimes the smallest tool is the one that cracks the entire foundation of history wide open. Let's travel back to the summer of 1999. In a dark, ancient forest near the town of Nebra in Germany, two treasure hunters are scanning the earth with metal detectors. They aren't archaeologists, they are looters, looking for a quick payday. Suddenly, their sensors scream. They dig deep into the soil and pull out a haul of bronze swords, axes, and a strange, mud-caked circular plate. At first, they think it's just a shield or a useless piece of scrap. They have no idea that they are holding what will later be called one of the most important and baffling discoveries of the 20th century. This object, now known as the Nebra sky disk, eventually made its way into the hands of experts after a dramatic police sting operation. And when the scientists cleaned off 3,600 years of dirt, their jaws dropped. What they saw was a heavy bronze disk, about 30 centimeters across, inlaid with gold symbols. There's a large golden circle, perhaps the sun or a full moon. There's a crescent moon. And there are 32 small gold stars, including a cluster that is clearly recognizable as the Pleiades. Now, on the surface, you might think, okay, it's ancient art. They like the stars. But as researchers dug deeper, they realized this wasn't art. It was an instrument, a tool of such high-level logic that it completely broke our understanding of the Bronze Age. You see, for a long time, historians believed that the people living in Central Europe 3,600 years ago were primitive. We thought they were warriors and farmers who lived simple lives, while the real science was happening far away in Egypt or Babylon. The Nebra sky disk proved us dead wrong. Across the edges of the disk, there are two golden arcs. Astronomers measured these arcs and found something incredible. The angle of these arcs, exactly 82 degrees, matches the precise range of the sun's movement between the summer and winter solstices at the exact latitude where the disk was found. This means the person who made this disk didn't just look at the sky. They understood the mathematical tilt of the Earth's axis relative to their specific location. They had mapped the horizon. But it gets even deeper. The Pleiades cluster on the disk wasn't just decorative. In the Bronze Age, the appearance of the Pleiades next to a new moon was a signal used to synchronize the lunar calendar with the solar year. This is a complex leap in logic. It's called an intercalary rule. It's the ancient version of a leap year. Without this knowledge, your calendar drifts, your seasons get lost, and your crops fail. Think about the implications. That 1,600 years before Christ, someone in the German wilderness was carrying a portable, handheld computer that could predict the solstices and align the months with the sun. It was a Bronze Age GPS. It allowed them to navigate time itself. The craftsmanship is another mystery. The gold wasn't local, it came from Cornwall, in England. The tin came from elsewhere. This disk represents a massive trade network and a unified scientific language that stretched across thousands of miles. When we look at the Nebra sky disk today, we aren't just looking at a piece of bronze. We are looking at a challenge to our ego. We like to think we are the first generation to master global positioning and complex calendars. But this disk stares back at us from 3,600 years ago, reminding us that our ancestors were watching the same stars with a level of mathematical brilliance that we are only just rediscovering. If this tool existed in a time when we thought people were primitive, what else were they capable of? What other computers were lost to the fires of history? Let's transport ourselves back to the year 132 AD, to the heart of the Han Dynasty in China. At this time, the world believed that earthquakes were signs from heaven, wrathful messages from the gods expressing displeasure with the emperor. People lived in constant fear, not just of the shaking earth, but of the divine judgment they thought it represented. But one man, a brilliant polymath named Heng, saw it differently. He didn't see ghosts or gods, he saw physics. He saw waves of energy traveling through the earth, and he decided to build a tool to catch them. When Heng finally walked into the imperial court to present his invention, the officials were baffled. He wasn't carrying a scroll or a map. He was presenting a massive, ornate bronze vessel, nearly 2 meters wide, shaped like a giant wine jar. Around its exterior, 8 dragons peered downward, each pointing toward a different compass direction. And at the base, 8 bronze toads sat with their mouths wide open, looking up at the dragons. To the aristocrats of the time, it looked like an expensive piece of art, a toy. They laughed. They called Zhang a dreamer. For years, the dragons sat silent in the palace. The bronze balls stayed firmly in their mouths. The court skeptics began to mock him, saying the machine was a failure. Until one afternoon, without any warning, without any local vibration, the machine suddenly sprang to life. A loud metallic clang echoed through the hall. One of the dragons had released its bronze ball, and it had fallen straight into the mouth of the toad facing west. The people in the palace felt nothing. The ground was still. The birds didn't fly away. The skeptics laughed even louder, claiming the machine was malfunctioning. But Heng remained calm. He told the emperor, "Somewhere, hundreds of miles to the west, the earth has moved." A few days later, a messenger on a sweat-lathered horse arrived from the Longxi region, nearly 400 miles away. He brought news of a devastating earthquake that had leveled cities at the exact moment the bronze ball had dropped. In an instant, Zhang Heng's toy became the most terrifyingly accurate computer in the world. But here's the real mystery that keeps modern scientists awake at night. How did it work? If you open the jar, you won't find wires or batteries. Zhang Heng's device was a masterpiece of analog computing. Inside the vessel, there was a delicately balanced central pillar, an inverted pendulum. This pillar was so sensitive that it could stay upright during local footsteps or wind, but it would react to the specific low-frequency P waves that travel ahead of a major earthquake. When those waves hit, the pillar would tilt in the direction of the vibration, triggering a series of levers and gears that would open the mouth of only one specific dragon. Think about the level of engineering required here. You need to understand inertia, you need to understand resonance, and you need to calculate friction so perfectly that the ball doesn't drop by accident. Zhang Heng had created a long-distance sensor centuries before the West even understood what a seismic wave was. In modern labs, teams from Japan and China have spent decades trying to build a working replica. And here's the kicker. They struggled. It turns out that making a pendulum that is stable enough to sit still for years, yet sensitive enough to hear an earthquake from 400 miles away, requires a level of precision that we usually associate with Swiss watchmaking or aerospace engineering. Zhang Heng didn't just build a detector. He built a bridge between the unseen forces of nature and human understanding. He proved that the Earth speaks a language of vibrations, and he was the first human to build a machine that could translate it. As we look at this bronze jar today, we have to ask, what other silent forces are moving around us right now that we are too primitive to hear, but Zhang Heng might have already mastered? Deep in the lush, emerald jungles of Costa Rica's Diquis Delta, there is a mystery that lies in plain sight. It doesn't look like a machine. It doesn't have gears or wires. At first glance, it's just a rock. But as you look closer, you realize that nature doesn't make things like this. What you are looking at is a collection of over 300 stone spheres, ranging from just a few centimeters to over 2 meters in diameter. And some of them weigh a staggering 15 tons. Now, you might think, okay, they are round rocks, so what? But here is where the plane becomes impossible. When researchers brought modern laser scanning equipment and high-precision calipers to these stones, they expected to find the lumps and imperfections of handmade art. Instead, they found something that defied logic. These spheres are almost mathematically perfect. We are talking about a deviation from a perfect circle so small that it is virtually invisible to the human eye. In some cases, the sphericity is so precise, it matches the tolerances we use today in precision ball bearings. Think about that. These stones were carved by the Diquis culture, starting around 600 AD. They didn't have steel tools. They didn't have GPS or 3D modeling software. Yet, they managed to take massive, irregular boulders of granodiorite, a stone, almost as hard as granite, and grind them into geometric perfection. How do you do that? To create a perfect sphere, you need to measure every single point on the surface from a central axis with absolute consistency. If you are off by just a fraction of an inch at the beginning, the whole shape collapses into an oval by the end. The Dickwis people were doing calculus with stone and sand, but the mystery doesn't end with the carving. It's also about the where and the how. Many of these spheres were found miles away from the quarries where the stone originated. We are talking about moving 15-ton boulders through dense, swampy jungles and across rivers without the use of the wheel or beasts of burden. And they weren't just dropped randomly. They were often arranged in complex alignments, straight lines, triangles, and curves that point with eerie accuracy to magnetic north or specific celestial events. This tells us that the spheres weren't just statues, they were tools. They were part of a massive landscape-scale instrument, a map of the Earth, or perhaps a map of the stars, laid out on the jungle floor. In the 1930s, when United Fruit Company was clearing the jungle for banana plantations, they found these spheres and didn't know what they were. Tragically, many were moved, damaged, or even blown up by treasure hunters who thought there was gold hidden inside. They found nothing but solid stone. But in their ignorance, they destroyed the original alignments, making it even harder for us to decode the software behind these stone computers. Why did this culture dedicate thousands, perhaps millions, of man-hours to creating perfect geometry? Why was almost round not good enough? In the ancient world, perfection was a language. It was a way of showing that they understood the fundamental laws of the universe. The same laws we use today to build satellites and telescopes. When you stand in front of one of these massive spheres, you feel a strange sense of order. In a jungle that is chaotic and wild, these stones represent a triumph of human logic. They are silent witnesses to a level of engineering that science still struggles to explain. They remind us that 1,500 years ago, there were masters of geometry living in the rainforests who didn't need a computer to calculate the perfect curve. They had the vision to see it inside a mountain and the will to bring it to life. Imagine you are standing on a rugged, wind-swept hilltop in the Scottish Highlands. Below you lie the ruins of a fortress built over 2,000 years ago. To the untrained eye, it looks like a pile of ancient rubble. But as you reach down and touch the stones, something feels wrong. These aren't just loose rocks held together by gravity. They are fused. They have been melted, twisted, and transformed into a dark, glassy substance. Welcome to the mystery of the Vitrified forts. There are about 70 of these sites scattered across Scotland, and for over 2 centuries they have been the ultimate cold case in archaeology. You see, these forts were built during the Iron Age, using a technique called dry stone construction. No mortar, no cement, just massive blocks of granite and sandstone stacked with precision. But at some point in history, something, or someone, subjected these walls to a heat so intense that the very molecules of the rock began to run like water. Now let's look at the science, because this is where the mystery turns into an impossibility. To melt granite, you need a sustained temperature of at least 100 degrees Celsius. To put that in perspective, a typical house fire or even a massive bonfire fueled by wood might reach 600 or 700 degrees. That's hot, but it's nowhere near enough to turn stone into glass. For decades, historians tried to explain this away. They suggested that perhaps an invading army set fire to the wooden gates and the heat spread. But engineers tested this theory. They built replica walls and set them on fire. The result? The wood burned away, the stones got scorched and soot-covered, but they didn't melt. Not even close. To achieve vitrification on this scale, you would need to surround the entire fortress with a massive, controlled furnace, piling up thousands of tons of timber and charcoal, and then somehow pumping in enough oxygen to reach industrial-level temperatures for days on end. Why would an invading army do that? It's a massive waste of resources. And why would the defenders do it? If you melt your own walls, they become brittle and prone to shattering. So, if it wasn't a standard fire, what was it? This is where the ancient laser or advanced technology theories begin to take root. Some independent researchers look at the patterns of the melting, which is often found in specific bubbles or zones, and they suggest that these forts were subjected to a concentrated beam of heat. A directed energy. Think about the legend of Archimedes and his heat ray, using mirrors to focus sunlight to burn ships. Could the ancients have possessed a primitive but powerful solar furnace technology? Or were these forts the targets of a weapon we don't yet understand? There is another, even more chilling possibility. Geologists have noted that the vitrification is often found in the core of the walls, while the outside remains relatively normal. It's as if the heat was generated from the inside out. Some have even whispered about ancient chemical mixtures, prehistoric versions of Greek fire or napalm, that burned with a fury that defied the laws of the time. When you walk among the ruins of Taponoth or Dunadir, you are walking through a crime scene where the evidence has been frozen in glass for 2 millennia. The stones are distorted, filled with air bubbles, and have the texture of volcanic lava. But there are no volcanoes in Scotland. These forts are a silent testament to a lost mastery of thermodynamics. Whether it was a ritual, a bizarre construction technique, or the aftermath of a forgotten war fought with high-heat weaponry, the vitrified forts prove one thing. Our ancestors had access to a power that science still cannot fully explain. They weren't just banging rocks together. They were bending the very elements to their will, leaving behind a glassy trail of questions that we are still trying to answer today. Now, I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine descending deep into the earth. You are on the island of Malta, stepping down a series of cold stone stairs. The air is heavy, the light is fading, and you are entering the Saflieni hypogeum. This is a massive 3-story underground complex carved entirely out of solid limestone over 5,000 years ago. It's a labyrinth of halls, chambers, and tombs. But we aren't here for the dead. We are here for a specific room called the Oracle Chamber. At first glance, it looks like just another hollowed-out cave. But this room holds a secret that modern science is only just beginning to decode. You see, when a man with a deep voice speaks in this chamber, something impossible happens. The sound doesn't just echo. It resonates. It vibrates through your very bones. It's as if the entire earth is humming back at you. For a long time, archaeologists thought this was just a fluke, a happy accident of ancient construction. But then, the acoustical engineers arrived. They brought in sensitive microphones and frequency analyzers, and what they discovered was chilling. The Oracle Chamber is tuned precisely to a frequency of 110 Hz. Now let's break down why that number is so important. In modern physics, 110 Hz is a low, deep bass frequency. But in neurology, it is a key that unlocks the human mind. Recent studies using EEG to monitor brain activity have shown that when a person is exposed to a sustained 110 Hz tone, something remarkable happens to their brain. The activity in the left prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, language, and critical thinking, suddenly begins to shut down. At the same time, the right side of the brain, the area associated with intuition, creativity, and deep emotional processing, becomes hyperactive. In simple terms, this room was designed to turn off your logical mind and force you into a state of trance. Think about the implications. 5,000 years ago, before the pyramids of Giza were even a dream, the people of Malta weren't just digging holes. They were master engineers of sound. To carve a room out of solid rock and achieve a specific resonance of 110 Hz requires an incredible understanding of volume, shape, and acoustic reflection. If they had carved just a few inches too deep or left the ceiling a bit too high, the frequency would have shifted and the magic would be gone. But they didn't miss. They hit it perfectly. Why? Why would an ancient civilization spend thousands of man-hours carving a mind-altering machine into the bedrock? Some believe it was for religious oracles, where a priest would chant, and the resonant frequency would induce a collective vision among the followers. Others suggest it was a form of ancient healing, using sound waves to reset the nervous system. Whatever the reason, The hypogeum of Saflieni proves that our ancestors understood a technology that we are only now rediscovering through the lens of neuroscience. They knew that architecture wasn't just about shelter. They knew that the right shape, in the right stone, with the right sound, could change who you are. As you stand in that dark, silent chamber today, you realize that the silence is an illusion. The room is waiting. It's a 5,000-year-old tool, built to bypass your logic and speak directly to your soul. It's a reminder that while we have built computers made of silicon, they built computers made of sound and stone. And theirs might still be more powerful than ours. We have traveled through ancient computers, nano-engineering, and mind-altering temples. But for our final mystery, we are going to look at something that doesn't just challenge a few history books. It threatens to collapse the entire foundation of modern geology and biology. It started in June 1936 in the small town of London, Texas. A local family, the Maxhans, were out hiking along Red Creek when they spotted a strange, loose rock with a piece of wood protruding from its core. They thought it was a curiosity, so they took it home. It sat on a shelf for nearly a decade until their son decided to crack it open with a chisel. What fell out of that rock wasn't a fossil. It was a hammer. Now, a hammer in a rock might not sound like a world-ending discovery unless you look at the rock itself. Geologists who examined the limestone nodule found that it belonged to the Edwards Formation. In plain English, that means the rock surrounding this hammer was formed during the Cretaceous period. We are talking about a time frame between 100 million and 140 million years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. 100 million years ago, the dinosaurs were the undisputed masters of the Earth. According to every scientific record we have, humans, or anything even remotely resembling a tool-building primate, wouldn't appear for another 99 million years. So how does a man-made tool end up encased in solid, prehistoric limestone? Mainstream science immediately moved to debunk it, claiming it was a calcified concretion, essentially that minerals had dissolved and rehardened around a modern hammer lost by a miner. But when the lab results came back for the metal head, the mystery only got deeper. The hammerhead is composed of 96% pure iron, 2.6% chlorine, and less than 1% sulfur. This is a very strange chemical signature. There are no bubbles in the metal, which suggests a level of metallurgical sophistication that is incredibly rare in modern casting, let alone ancient blacksmithing. But the most baffling part? The iron hasn't rusted. Since it was pulled from that rock in 1936, it has shown zero signs of corrosion. Then there's the handle. The wood has begun the process of petrification. It is turning into coal. To petrify wood, you need immense pressure and specific chemical conditions over a vast amount of time. If this were a miner's hammer from the 1800s, it wouldn't be encased in a 100-million-year-old rock nodule, and its handle wouldn't be turning into coal. So we are left with a terrifying choice of conclusions. Either our methods for dating the Earth's geological layers are fundamentally broken, meaning the Earth is much younger than we think. And this is the one that keeps researchers awake at night. Someone was walking the Earth 100 million years ago. Someone who knew how to forge high-purity iron. Someone who used tools that look remarkably like our own. Was it a time traveler? Was it a survivor from a pre-human civilization that rose and fell long before the first mammal even crawled out of the shadows? Or is our history a cycle that repeats every few 100 million years, erasing the traces of the previous masters of the planet? The London hammer is more than just a tool. It is a glitch in the matrix of our history. It sits in a museum in Texas today, a silent, iron-headed witness to a truth we aren't ready to accept. It reminds us that no matter how much we think we know about our past, we are still just children playing in the ruins of a world that is far older and far more mysterious than we ever dared to imagine. We've seen nanocoils that require 3,000 degrees to forge, found in layers of earth from a time when we supposedly lived in caves. We've touched foul-dye walls melted by a heat we cannot replicate. We've seen a hammer that claims to be 100 million years old. So where does this leave us? Mainstream science will tell you these are anomalies. They will tell you to ignore the data because it doesn't fit the model. But true science is about following the evidence, no matter where it leads. And these 7 artifacts lead us to a humbling conclusion. We are not the first. Perhaps the history of Earth is not a book with one long chapter, but a library of many books, most of which have been burned, buried, or forgotten. We are just the readers of the most recent page. These objects aren't just remnants of the past. They are warnings for the future. They prove that technology can be lost. Knowledge can vanish. And one day, our greatest inventions, our smartphones, our satellites, our cities, might also be found by a future traveler, buried under millions of years of rock, labeled as impossible objects. Thank you for exploring the forbidden timeline with us. The truth is out there, hidden in the dirt, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to join us on our next hunt for the truth. Until next time, keep digging.